Tuesday, so that should get us caught up to where we are at now. We're going to discuss a couple of topics about getting started working on a game project. We'll talk about some of the materials that you hopefully should be able to acquire when starting out a game project, when you're hired on a new game, some of the things that you can hope to get your hands on to really make your process of starting up a whole lot easier. And typically it goes back and forth as everybody's figuring out their details. Hopefully you can get some art or concept art that will influence your music, and then your music will influence the designers and the programmers and the artists, and everything will kind of grow together. So we'll talk about, here it is, preparation and workflow, some of the tools to get started. We'll also talk about different game genres, what the sort of direction of music for each different type of game. So when you are hiring on a new game and they say that it's a puzzle game or an action game or a fighter game or a racing game, then you generally have some ideas of what music might be appropriate for any sort of game style. We will also discuss a bit of history of game audio. Your production technique assignment this week is to create music in the style of a retro chiptune composition using all of the restrictions from the original Nintendo system. And that, along with that, provided a series of sound banks to give you access to those types of sounds for that kind of composition. So to really get a sense of where we are at and what where we have come from in the audio industry for games, we'll kind of go down the history of different years and decades and the different game consoles and talk about what the audio capabilities were in each generation of games. So we'll talk about the Nintendo, Sega, we'll go through Xbox and PlayStation, and discuss all of the changes that have happened over the years. All right, so let me take a quick pause before we get into our preparation here. Hold on just a sec. All right, to start out here, you're going to really be working hard when you're first starting out and trying to get into the industry and starting out with your first series of projects, trying to get hired and trying to convince new clients to have you work on their projects. But then one day you'll get an email or a phone call that says you're hired for the project. And really the real work begins at that point because you've been spending a whole bunch of time convincing everybody that you can do the work. But then it's really time to put it to the test and be able to realize the full music soundtrack to a game project for a particular client. So any sort of tools that they can give you to really get that process started is beneficial to everybody involved. So hopefully there is some form of documentation that exists for the game in a couple of different ways or forms. More than likely, as the music composer, you are not necessarily hired on day one when they first start to develop this project. When it doesn't even exist, they're just trying to figure out what the game is all about, the characters, the story, the different scenes and objectives and goals through the game. There's no game to write music for at that point. So typically, it's a little bit deeper into the process. Once there are more ideas that have hopefully been set to paper or put into maybe some online resource that you can check out, and having access to things like scripts or storyboards, a overall list of VO dialogue, or the not even a script but a write up of what the game might be about. And the storyboards, if there are any predetermined scenes that are ready to be created by the artists, if you can get any sort of overview of what the game is all about, you can start determining how many levels might be in the game, the different locations and scenes that are taking place throughout the storyline, and hopefully those initial sort of ideas where in the beginning it's written on the back of a cocktail napkin, and or just a series of lines of an overview of the game in an early email, but over time the game takes more and more of a shape. So one aspect here, actually here in the chat, let me address this first. Am I available anytime tomorrow to go over the project revisions with you? Go ahead and we can talk about that towards the end of class today. We can set up a time to meet and discuss anything that you need. So with a design document, it is, in a very generic sense, sort of like a business plan, where if you needed to start a business or to sell a product or offer a service, then you would need a business plan. You need investors, or you need the bank to give you a loan. Then there's typically some document that describes what you are making or what you're selling, how you are going to make it, your costs in manufacturing or running your business, keeping the lights on, your location, what are you going to create, how are you going to create it, and how any employees or all of the resources that are needed to build that business, and most importantly, how the company is going to make money to pay back the investors into the business. And so in a very general sense, a design document is sort of like a business plan for a game. When a game developer has an amazing idea for a game, and they have all the ideas but none of the money, they can go to game publishers. And of course, there's lots of different ways of acquiring money for building your game, but certainly one of the main ways is that a game developer goes to a publisher, or maybe the other way around, with a game idea, and they present it and determine what type of game it is, and that typically takes its form in a design document that lays out what the story is, what the characters are in the game, what is the storyline, what are the objectives, what are all the locations in the game world, what's the game all about, how does it control, what technology is it built on, is it a console game or a PC game or a mobile game, and it really just lays out all of as much detail of the game or all of the specifications that are necessary, as much as it can, as they can do in the beginning of the process. So a portion of that, hopefully, is now for music and sound. And it's either in the form of a PDF document, or maybe they actually printed something out for you, or it could be some online website or a wiki or something like that just is a huge resource of information about all aspects of the game. And there will be a section for music and sound. And you open it up, and either it lists all of the aspects, the overall direction that they want to go, what type of game it is, maybe some examples or demos of the music that they might expect for this game. And other times you open it up and it says, to be determined by the music composer. And you're like, well, great, that's me. I got to figure out all of the aspects. And sometimes it's really, really good because it's very creative and free for you to take it in your own direction. Other times it can be stressful because you have to come up with all of the aspects and ideas and taking exactly what the client wants and rendering it into music. So a design document will help you out and gets everybody literally on the same page of determining the direction of the game. An asset list. An asset list is typically a kind of comes in the form of a spreadsheet often, and it is a list of all of the sounds, the actual wave files that are needed for the project or for the game. Our game composition projects have asset lists in the documentation, and it lists the 9 files that you need to create for the game. And if you it lists the sample rate and the bit depth and all of the formatting of the files, along with a list of all of the actual names of each one of them. And this is a very, very useful document for everybody involved in getting this music working in the game. Because you, as the music composer, you don't have to know anything about the game, the programming, the code, or how it actually works in the game. All you need to know is that if you create a series of files that are named intro, main menu, level loop, win, lose, or whatever the file names end up being, and you format the files exactly to the specifications, then it's going to work properly in the game. And then the programmers, the game developers, they don't have to know anything about the music. They're certainly not aware or considering the DAW or the theory behind your composition as a whole. They just want something to sound amazing in their game. So all they know is the wave files, and they go deep into the code somewhere and say, okay, whenever the game starts, then play A_music_main menu music, right? The main menu pops up. We want to play main menu music. They know what the wave file is named. They know the specifications, and they go type it up into the code. And the next time the game plays, it's looking for that particular file. So the asset list is, number one, a specification and a list of all of the assets needed for the game. The other thing is it's a great way of getting paid on the project, or having a very well determined list of all of the assets needed for a particular paycheck or a particular contract or a particular milestone, however you want to define it. But it says, okay, we have a list here of 100 sounds, and if I create these 100 sounds, or I create this 10 minutes worth of music or 1 hour worth of music, then you will pay me X amount of money. And that's determined through negotiation and through a contract. But I deliver these 100 wave files, and you pay me X amount of money. If you don't use all of them, if you use 85 or 90 of them, that's okay. I still get paid the full contract amount, but we determine that these are the sounds that will be delivered, and I will deliver those sounds. If you need more than these sounds, then that's also fine. We'll just continue at that particular rate and add on those new sounds or those extra minutes of music that I create. So it is a very well-determined list or spreadsheet of information about all of the files that you are going to deliver, and a very very good use for determining how to get paid. Here in the chat, should we ask about their budget prior to providing them a cost? Absolutely. It is always a game of poker or a card game. Nobody wants to show their cards. The first question is often to you as the music composer, how much do you charge? And then I typically respond with, I don't know, how much you got? And determining how much you're going to charge versus how much is in their budget is always the game of going back and forth. And if you say, pay me X, if you say pay me $100, and they go absolutely, and then you're like, wait a second, I didn't charge them enough, right? Don't just charge have somebody pay you $100 for your music or your song. Determine what your rate is, determine what their budget is. Obviously, we'll talk about it. Actually, I think I mentioned it last Thursday, where music for games is often per recorded minute of music, right? When you deliver 60 minutes of music, then they're going to pay you X amount per minute of music. So whatever it is. Now, $100 per minute of music, that's a better rate. $500 or $250, $500, $1,000. Determining what that is and what their budget is. So if they say yes very, very quickly, you probably didn't charge enough. If they go, I don't know, I'll have to talk to my boss, or I'll have to look at our budget, or I have to let's see how that fits in our overall budget, then that's maybe a better place to be. Of course, it's always that balance, right? You don't want to price yourself out of the game so that you lose the client, but you also don't want them to go, okay, yeah, I'll pay you that much, and maybe could have budgeted it more clearly. Also here in the chat, I'm speaking to someone about a game opportunity. I have no idea how to charge because this would be my first one. I think I talk about it in the last archive where there's a couple of different ways that I like to charge overall. Figuring out the exact dollar amount is a little bit of a different story, and I'll hit on that too. But the first way would be an hourly rate. That's often the way clients or people think about money and work to begin with. And that's kind of hard when you're sitting in the studio working on your own and defining or quantifying how much per hour it costs to make music. So figuring now, if I'm on location and I'm working with you 8 hours or 10 hours or however many hours a day, then that's a little bit easier because I am available to you, and we can figure out what my daily or hourly rate would be, or daily rate. The next one would be per project, and that is also a bit difficult to say, pay me $1,000 for this, or $5,000 for this, or however much for the entire project, because more than likely it includes all of your costs, not only keeping your lights on and keeping your family fed, but the costs of operating your studio and recording costs and all sorts of different things. And if it's just project-based and the timeline is a month or 3 months or 6 months from now for the deadline, then making that last over that amount of time, right? $1,000 doesn't seem so bad in the beginning, but if you have to stretch that over a long period of time, then that's not so much. So charging per minute of finished music, maybe you can find a way to determine that rate. Type it in, go through them with a calculator and figure out what your what $1 an hour, $10, $100, $1,000 an hour, a minute worth of music, how much that would end up. Like, ask the client, how many minutes of music do you think you will need for this project? Determining a project rate is a bit more difficult if the client doesn't know what they want. A lot of times you'll ask, like, how many minutes worth of music do you think this will require? Or together through discussion, let's figure out how much work this is going to be. Trying to define the scope of the project will greatly affect the price. And so if the client doesn't know what they want, or they're really early in the, or sort of the beginning stages of the project, then having a whole project rate is a kind of a difficult way to figure it out, because who knows? Just as much as you don't know what the game's going to be about, I don't know how much to charge you overall. So another way I like to work is on a retainer, which retains your service. You can identify you need me for 5 hours or 10 hours or 20 or 40 hours a week, and every 2 weeks, you pay a retainer to retain your services to work on your game. And so that allows the game to progress on however long it goes for, whatever you would consider would be fair to have on a weekly basis or a bi-weekly basis. of creating music for this ongoing game, that might work. If they kind of feel like, hey, this is going to take a month or 3 months or 6 months, then maybe you can negotiate out a rate. Figuring out what the exact dollar amount would be is certainly a completely different story, and that comes, it's way more personal in what your costs are to live. It depends on where you live and what you do. Do you have another job? Is this the sole source of income? Typically it's a calculator and a piece of paper, and you write down all of your costs, your rent and your bills, and just your entire, what does it take to keep the lights on and your family fed, and just the absolute bare minimum. And obviously that's not where you want to be. So then you double it and triple it and figure out what that means per hour and per week and per month. And if you can kind of do an inventory of your costs, like maybe you have your current job and you make this much amount money at your current job, but that's not what you want to make. You want to make that much money and figure out what it takes to get to where you want to be. And of course, that might be very, very different for everybody. But then somewhere in all of that, you might be able to figure out a general rate of, okay, at the very bare minimum, man, if I really, really just wanted to work with this client and it wasn't about the money, then just the bare minimum that I could make is this. But if it's going to be a long, involved project and there's a lot of work involved, then at the higher end of your scale, it could be that. And also refer to the on, when do I talk about that? It's the week 1 Thursday. So last Thursday, I also introduced the game audio salary survey. Any types of salary surveys, you can just go on Google and type in salary survey for an industry. I know that there's a game audio salary survey, and it's typically people anonymously telling what they make and how they make it and how much they charge. And if you can get any sort of that generic information or do it for your kind of your cost of living around your where you live, those are the types of things overall. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways. What I would suggest you don't do is say, this is how much I charge, and that's the only way that I will accept payment, or I won't work at all. Just to have basically one way of getting paid. Like, this is how I make money, and that's the only way. Like, give your client a menu of options. They want to feel like they're involved and they're saving themselves money, and so make it so that, if you need to do this, then you can get this, like a rate sheet, or I can charge this for this, or basically I can make it work. If you have tons of money, right, working with EA Sports, they have tons of money. It's getting them to share it with me is sometimes the challenge. But I know that they're big and they're corporate, and they're always going to pay their bills. But also have more indie clients that don't have a wealth of money up front, but maybe I really enjoy their project, or I really believe in the final product that's going to be created, and they can make it work if whatever the scale is. But figuring out what that is your own calculations overall. All right, so let's get back to concept art here. As the game develops and as it builds, there will be more and more of the game to write music for. And so you will start out with a huge pile of music that you have to do, and a very small pile of music that's completed and approved, and then it'll kind of switch over time, and you'll be building out more and more as there's more of the game. So getting your hands on concept art in the beginning, maybe some 2D or 3D models and animations later on, and then finally an actual working version of the game at some point. Here we have a game build. Eventually there will be a functioning version of the game. In the beginning it will be full of bugs and it will crash all the time, but they're fixing all of that, and there will be only one level or only a small portion of the game, but it gets built bigger and bigger and bigger. So you will get test versions of your games over time. And all of our games this month are kind of like this. They're not full games. They're not complete games. They don't have storylines or full development of character. They're just like what is sometimes known as a vertical slice. And a vertical slice is one level or one part of the game that works and is as complete as they can get it at that point in time, and they can show it off to different people, and they send a copy to you, and you get to play your way through the game, and hopefully they're developing these things constantly so you can check out how everything works together. Research, in the process of preparation and developing all of the tools that you are going to need for a project. When you get hired on, and maybe hopefully even a little bit before that, you are doing your research. And that takes all sorts of different forms. Certainly there is game research, and in the game industry, this is definitely important. You should be playing video games and up on all the newest and latest games, what's out there, what's popular, what is everybody playing, how do they do the music, who the composer is, who the developer is, just every aspect of the game. I have a big problem with keeping up with games overall. I mean, there's just so many of them come out. There's all these cool things. I don't know if you're familiar with the Steam Game Store. It's an online, both Mac and PC. It's an online game. It's kind of like iTunes for games. And there are just tons of sales and all sorts of games that are available on there, and the Mac games also. So I have a huge long list of, if you know Steam, you certainly know what I'm talking about with their Steam sales and the long list of games that might build up over time. But it's just the same. If you're in the music industry, you need to be paying attention to all the newest and latest music. If you are in the movie industry, you need to be watching all sorts of films, and with music and films, new and old, and all aspects of it. Story research, music research. Stories take classic tropes and archetypes and develop them further, and so you certainly have to know have the language of story, and has games have their history in film and television and theater. So understanding story and what is expected through those, and then of course music. If it's a particular style of music that the soundtrack needs, if it's a particular period of time or culture or research on instrumentation or just figuring out the overall design and aesthetic of the music soundtrack, often that takes research, listening and finding classic versions of a particular musical style and studying them. Sound palette. This is determining, building your toolbox, determining all of the tools and techniques and instruments that you are going to use, the sounds that you will be using in building this composition. Determining, and this is a lot of back and forth with the client early on. You send out ideas and they say no, and then you revise them and send them back, and eventually they get to a yes. You determine style and genre and tempo and instrumentation and styles of mix and, like I said, culture or a time period. If you don't have the instrumentation that is needed for that particular game project, you go out and find it. So building, maybe adding libraries or buying instruments, building out your studio a little bit more, or determining if you need studio time, recording studio time, getting session musicians or a particular special instrument, special player. Is the music going to be entirely in the box? Is it going to be entirely maybe a large orchestra recorded in a studio? Recording studio. Or is it going to be a hybrid of digital sample libraries and recorded musicians? Figuring out the sound of your soundtrack takes a while. And sometimes it's left more up to you. Sometimes the client takes a lot of interest in where it's going to go. And then you create just kind of like a palette or a toolbox of ideas that you can use, and then when you're developing the soundtrack, you're twisting them and turning them in all sorts of new ways, and you are able to repurpose all of those tools for whatever you need in the composition. The next one here is game genres. Let me see something here. Okay. And with game genres, we're going to talk about the overall musical approach that a particular game might take. And game genres are like music genres in that they are wide and varied, and you can find all sorts of things that break music genres or game genres, things that don't fit anywhere. So what we are going to do when talking about the different types of games or the different game genres and the different music that correlates or often is thought of when talking about a particular game, we're going to make it as generic as possible, so wide open, so we can, of course, we know things can break genres and don't fit in different places, but we're going to make them as wide and generic as possible so we can shove a whole lot of different types of games and ideas into those categories. So if a client says that they're going to make a racing game or a fighting game or a first-person shooter or a multiplayer online game, a casual game or a mobile game, a kids game or a sports game or whatever it is, then you know what they're talking about, and you know generally what might be expected in that type of music soundtrack. So let me take another quick pause here before we get started. All right. So, way back a couple of decades ago, there used to be these big rooms that had a whole bunch of loud machines in them that ate your quarters, and the only way you were actually able to play video games was to go to your local arcade and play arcade machines. They were in your movie theater or your mall or your Pizza Hut or whatever it was. Pizza store, I guess, would be less specific. And that was the only way that folks could play video games. And the purpose of those games and the audio of those games in the beginning, before you put your quarter in, was to be obnoxious and attention-grabbing. So you would head from across the room to go play and spend your quarter on that machine. And the game experience overall was pretty short. You always started at level 1, and they were often based around levels. The arcade machine was not very powerful, but compared to modern computers. But so the music was synthesized with often simple waveforms, sometimes known as bloops and bleeps. And short, repetitive musical experiences. But this also meant that they were very catchy, and with all of those restrictions, they had to write some amazing melodic content, so not only would it grab your attention, but you would remember it over and over again. And plus, for the fact that every single time you put in that quarter, you heard the same sounds, it started up the same way, it became very, very memorable. It wasn't too long after that game consoles come along. You have Atari and Nintendo comes, and instead of paying one quarter at a time, you just go give them $300 worth of quarters, and you get your Nintendo machine, and you take it home and fill it full of games and play all you want. And so home consoles certainly changed arcades, and arcade games have taken a new form overall and kind of resurfaced in mobile devices, iOS, Android, app sort of games. puzzle games. Certainly, Angry Birds is absolutely huge. But there's typically, well, we got Plants vs. Zombies. I don't know if anybody plays any of the Farmville games anymore on Facebook, but they're short experiences. The devices are restricted. They're not very powerful compared to modern computers. I mean, an iPhone is still amazingly powerful for how small it is, but they are meant for shorter gameplay. You play on a phone on a game for just a little while, or people play for a very long time. So, often based off of levels, looping music. It's a good place to start out in the industry. This is the size and scope of these games are not absolutely huge. So, and the developers that are making these games are also often starting out, and so you can end up getting involved in a smaller project that ends up becoming a big hit. On the opposite end of the spectrum in size and scale and money and budget and all of that stuff is big, what are sometimes known as AAA titles, big action games. These are often first-person or third-person shooters. The likes of Call of Duty or a Halo or an Assassin's Creed or a BioShock game or what's people playing these days? Destiny is a big one out there. All sorts of... but these games require very big soundtracks, are often either orchestral or certainly live recorded music. They can take all sorts of different shapes. They also come in, often show up in two different flavors, a single-player game and a multiplayer game, where single-player are kind of story, narrative-driven experiences, where it's almost like an interactive movie. You play the main character and you go through a series of adventures, and the music is built around that, a really kind of linear experience. It might feel like a big open world, but what you do and kind of the order that you move through the game is very much linear. You go from point A to point B, and you fight some enemies, and that leads you to point C, and then you solve a puzzle, and that gets you to point D, and you keep moving your way through the game. A multiplayer game is player versus player, where human versus human, people on the network or on the internet playing against each other, running around and causing all sorts of havoc in all of these games. But it's all about playing against another live human being versus a computer. So the music for multiplayer games are a bit more difficult overall because... number one, a lot of people turn off music in multiplayer games to get maybe a little tactical advantage so they can hear things a bit differently. Also, a difficulty if I win, I need to hear winning music. That means you lost, so you need to hear losing music. And how do they play and how do sounds work together? Not only is the game rendering your entire stereo or 5.1 surround mix for your game, but it's also rendering everybody else's on their computers and then back so that you hear those same sounds also. There's just a lot of logical sort of conundrums when working in multiplayer with people playing across the internet. But these games often are big budget. They make a whole bunch of money. There's a lot riding and being risked on them. That's not often a good place to start. You're not going to walk directly out of school and probably work on, be the sole composer on the next Call of Duty game on your first try out. Typically, people build up to those levels overall where they're getting experienced talent that they know that they can deliver on the product. But big, large games kind of is sort of in the same line as we'll move over to adventure games. And adventure games are on the same level of size and budget and complexity overall. One of the main differences between an action game and an adventure game, of course, there's all sorts of things that blur these lines, but we're mainly talking about kind of what's known as an open world adventure game, where instead of a linear game experience where, like I said, it goes point A to point B to point C, often, well, a lot of times they take the form of a fantasy adventure game where you're dropped into a safe central town and you go off in any sort of direction. You talk to the local townspeople, and they give you quests and adventures, and you're sent off, and you go in any sort of direction. And those games are a bit more difficult overall from the composer's point of view, because it's not A to B to C. They start at point Q, and then they go to Z, and then they go to X, and then they go to D, and then they go in all sorts of different directions, and you are given the choice of going through the story in whatever way that you would like. So it's a bit more difficult to build a music system for these types of games because you don't know when anything is going to happen. You know what is possible, but you don't know when that's going to happen. You know that once you go to the secret dungeon that there's going to be eventually a dragon that they have to fight, but you don't know when they're going to get there. Instead of knowing when, one of the main things that these games are based off of is where the player is the location of the player. We don't know when you're going to get to that cave, but once you get there, you go in to fight the dragon, then you're going to hear dragon fighting music. So the games are based off of location. Another way of saying that, or another aspect, is proximity. Location and proximity are based pretty closely. So proximity is how close are you to danger, or how close are you to finding the secret, or how close are you to solving the puzzle, or whatever it is. So whether it's location, whether it's proximity, these games will, the music will build in their own custom way. So certainly adventure games, fantasy adventure games have their history through, back to Dungeons and Dragons, or Lord of the Rings, or more commonly in games themselves, the Legend of Zelda. People have played for a very long time through World of Warcraft, the Elder Scrolls series with Skyrim, or all of the Elder Scrolls Online. Those are massively large games. Not so much in the history kind of realm, or not history, but fantasy realm. I guess it's not history. But we have all of the Rockstar games. Of course, Grand Theft Auto. You don't have to go through Grand Theft Auto in any particular way. And a lot of times people don't play Grand Theft Auto for actually playing through the story. They just go in and do all sorts of ridiculous things. And Red Dead Redemption, or if you've played Red Dead Redemption, it's basically Grand Theft Auto in the Old West, but absolutely amazing, great soundtrack. But all of these things you should definitely check out and see how they work. There's a great behind-the-scenes video of Red Dead Redemption and how the music was built. Here, the queues are fairly long for adventure games. Absolutely. Adventure games are very much based on the idea of exploration and battle. Because for these games, since they're so wide open, who knows how long it's going to take for you to get from one place to the next or do whatever activity is necessary. So, it's not measured in bars necessarily. It's measured in minutes worth of music. So longer musical passages when you know the player's just going to be wandering around for a little bit will give a lot more room for the composition to develop. All right, let's see. Often defined as hardcore games. Yeah, they take... these are not simple, quick games. They often take a lot of learning and the knowledge of the game, take some skill to play them, take a lot of time. And people have been playing World of Warcraft for over a decade and have lost relationships over it for all of the good and bad that happens with all of that. But takes a lot of dedicated time. And so that also means that there's a lot of content for the games. Now, switch over to sports games. And I would probably even expand this a little bit wider to be experience games. Games that are based around a realistic experience, whether it's mimicking a football game or a soccer game or playing golf or a racing game or even the extreme sports, skateboarding game or snowboarding game. These games are based off of the game season. They're annual games or cyclical games, meaning that every single year they make another one. And they are not necessarily going to be, they don't have much need for proprietary composed music, meaning that they don't pull a soundtrack necessarily from a single composer. They go to the pop music charts or they go find a particular new artist to give exposure to in their games. So these games require licensed popular music. It's not necessarily a place where you're going to send your demo CD as a composer and get the full soundtrack to the next Madden game. They go out and look at the charts. They know every single year they've got a hit at the beginning of the sports season. So a couple of months before that, they're looking at the charts and figuring out who's putting their next album out and trying to get that music on their game. And it's a great place if you are a recording artist or you are a recording engineer or a producer or you own a record label or doing artist development. It's a great place of getting your artists some exposure because you hear the songs over and over and over again. People play the game every time they go through the menu or start the game. They hear a particular piece of music. And so it is trying to mimic a realistic experience of what can be heard. So it's a lot more of licensed music and working with the record labels or the recording artists themselves. Yeah, Dance Central here in the chat. Singing games, dancing games, music games, all of those kind of would fall under the experience umbrella, where they're trying to mimic the experience of being on stage and requires licensed music. All right. So the next thing here, we talked about game genres, so that can give you some idea of what type of music, in a very general sense, that a game might need. If they say it's a multiplayer online shooter, or if it's a kind of an open world multiplayer online, what do they call them? MMORPGs, massively multiplayer online role-playing games. Or if it's a small puzzle game, or if it's a mobile game, or just give you a general sense of what music might be necessary, and then it's up to you to do a whole bunch of research in those types of games. So this one, locations for music. This is almost like a timeline where when you, again, you're starting out a game project, you're kind of defining everything and you're figuring out how much music you need, what kind of music it is, where does it all fit in the game. And so this is almost like a timeline of a game where you might plug in different pieces of music to fill in the holes over the course of the game itself. So hold on for just a sec. All right. So one of the first element here of games often have cinematics or cutscenes. And these are a very comfortable place for a music composer because they're like little movies. Often at the beginning of a level or the end of a level, there's a little movie or sequence that is pre-recorded. You can't control it. And like I said, it's like a little movie that exposes the next part of the story. And so if you know, as the game composer, that there are 17 levels in the game and there's a a cutscene at the end of each one of those levels, then you might define, okay, well, those cutscenes are going to be about a minute or two long, so we know there's a big chunk of music that we need, and we can pretty well define that. One of the problems with cutscenes is they aren't typically finished until pretty late into the process because they have to be created and rendered. There's often motion capture involved. You have to, it may not be until later in the process when more things are nailed down that they actually create these scenes. But you can know that they exist and kind of budget your time for them. These kind of go along with the scripts and storyboards that we first started out with as an element that's a really good part of the game to identify and kind of design for. Really in line with the cinematics and cutscenes are intros and endings. You know that they exist. Most games have a really cool intro in the beginning of the game, and sometimes the end of the game is not as exciting overall. And some games have really gotten in trouble for everybody works so hard through the game and it's a little short ending and kind of a letdown, or the players get the wrong ending that they don't want or expect. And so developers know that 100% of people are going to see the first introduction movie, and only a smaller percentage of that are going to get all the way to the ending. So you have to leave a little something there for the big payoff. You know that there's going to be something grand and epic to grab everybody's attention at the beginning, and a good place to start. So certainly want to account, because those typically take a little bit of extra love overall. Then you have the game itself. And of course, this takes all sorts of shapes and forms. We kind of dedicate each project to this idea where, yes, we are creating music for a game, but it takes a different music and the different way to be set up for each game. Whether we do ambient and action, like we're focusing on in Angry Bots, the idea of intros, loops, and endings from 2D platformer, and then next week we have a completely different approach overall to the music. And so this often becomes the most of the challenge for the game composer, because it's widely varied, and once you give the player the controller, then who knows what they're going to do, and they're going to do all sorts of wrong things that you need to account for. And how long does the music play, and where does it play, and how does it transition and switch? That all comes the music and the game become very well tied together. So you want music during actual gameplay is often secondary to the game experience, maybe even the sound effects. It's often a bit of underscore overall. Doesn't really want to draw attention to itself. It doesn't want to become repetitive so that you hear the same thing over and over and over again. So it really becomes a challenge, but ends up being a bulk of the music soundtrack. Probably second only to playing the game itself is menus and UI. The player's going to spend a lot of time in the menus, whether it's the beginning or first menu when you first turn on the game, you choose the level, you choose your character, or whether it's the pause menu in between, where you choose your weapon, or you choose options, or you choose look at a map or a journal, or often the menus end up being a separate place for the audio, especially in a pause menu. It stops and kind of filters the external sounds, and you only hear the sounds internally in the menu. Menus are a great place for a junior sound designer or an entry-level composer to work on, because you're probably not going to win any awards for your amazing music during your menu, or the awesome little pops and clicks that happen in the user interface. But there's a lot of it. It often has one overall aesthetic and central idea behind it. So it's a very important place, but it's a lot of work. So it's often given to the newer team members. But it's a very necessary place, and you need to consider all of the aspects of a what can be often a large menu. Game trailers. Important aspect of the game to point out, because very important to understand that as the music composer for the game, you would most likely not be doing the game trailer. They may take your music from the game and edit it into the trailer, but the people that make the game don't make the game trailer. Just like movies, it's sent out to a trailer house or a post house, and the folks that make advertisements for movies and other forms, products, those are the same people that make game trailers. So not more than likely not going to be you and creating that, unless they ask you, hey, we got a game trailer and we want you to compose to it. That might be an aspect of it. But a lot of times you won't even hear music from the game in the trailer. Just like the movie, they take trailer music and build it that way to build another sense of excitement into the trailer. So aspects that you need to consider, though. What this really leads me to is aspects of the game and the use of your music and licensing your music for all sorts of stuff. Meaning that you have to consider in the contract all of the different places that your music will exist. Which is one reason that the game company often wants to buy out your music completely, because they have to use it in so many different locations. Your music, not only is it used in the game, but they might want to use it in any extra downloadable content or any extra updates to the game. For sequels to the game, they might want to have either the exact same piece of music or a revised version of it. They want to be able to use it in advertising and marketing. They might want to use it in the mobile game. They might want to use it on the website. There's considerations of using it in all of the different platforms of Nintendo and PlayStation and Xbox and iOS and Android. Sometimes that's a consideration. If it's an international release, that's another consideration of your music. And so that can become quite expensive for a game developer to license a piece of music for all of those different uses, but which is often why they might want to buy out your compositions. However, a smaller game developer with less of a budget may not have the ability to buy you out entirely, and so you can retain those rights of how the music is used. You might even retain the rights for the soundtrack of the game, so that, okay, well, less money up front, but I can release the soundtrack and make some money off of it that way. So just different considerations and how your music is used overall and where it's used. All right, so that was locations in the game, different parts of the game, whether it's in a menu or in a cutscene, or if it's in the game itself, or it's used in all the other places outside of the game that is needed for your music. Game music themes is a bit more generic in that it's not a specific location, but it's more attached to characters or ideas or levels in the game or locations in the game, whether it's a person, place, or thing, and how do you attach the music overall. This is a very common approach to the music. We have the main theme. The main theme often comes in the main menu. The main theme becomes the piece of music that's often most identifiable with that game. Often becomes from the main menu, because every single time you load up the game, you hear it over and over again. But you as the composer don't typically sit down to write the main theme. Or there's often not very much intention, except for in a very generic sense, of how a piece of music is going to be used in the game. You may not know exactly for what level and what scene something is built for, but you create music to match an overall emotion or action or theme that's necessary. So You don't start out by saying, okay, today's day one of the project, I'm going to write music for level one. And then on day two, I'm going to write music for level two. And today, I'm going to write the main theme. Typically, it becomes shows itself, becomes more evident organically in that there's a piece of music that people refer back to or becomes very memorable over the project, or the director or producer says, man, whenever I think about this game, I think about that piece of music, and it really becomes part of the overall identity of the game. So often that comes from time and eventually will show itself. But often the main theme contains what are sometimes known as musical constants, aspects of the music, whether it's particular instrumentation or theme or production approach, that is found throughout the entire soundtrack. So whether it's a melodic idea or a particular instrument sound or whatever it is, becomes reusable throughout the game and identifies and kind of connects from the beginning all the way through the game. A very common concept through theater, film, television, and certainly one of the more identifiable leitmotifs these days would be Darth Vader's The Imperial March. You know, whenever he shows up, you're going to hear that particular theme music, thematic music. And so this is attaching music to a concept or an idea or a thing in the game, a person, a place, or a thing, and attaching music to a particular idea where it's not, maybe you don't hear it every single time, but there are elements throughout whenever you encounter that. Well, we'll start out here with that character. So a character theme becomes very obvious or very consistent. Is that French? Yes. I believe leitmotif is French. So whether it's Zelda's theme or Link's theme from The Legend of Zelda, that's a better way of saying that, or whether it's Mario theme or the overworld, the underworld, sometimes gets to be very identifiable with that character. So every time you enter that shop, or every time you encounter that boss at the end of the game level, you hear that particular musical theme. A level theme. Lots of games are divided out by levels, and so attaching a piece of music only to that level is a very common approach. Fighting games were really good at this. In Mortal Kombat, the only time you ever heard that particular music theme was when you encountered that character, and you only fought that character on their home level. Well, not all the time, but often the music may not be attached to that character, but that character's level. And so this is still a very, very common approach, and allows you to divide up the musical soundtrack in very distinct sections as the player continues through. All right, so game themes, different ways of attaching your music, different ideas and concepts. Really what all of those slides and ideas that we were talking about in our discussion this evening, really that's more like a checklist of things to start with when building out your music soundtrack. When you're trying to figure out the size and the scope of a project and what music is needed, where it's needed, how much is needed, hopefully you can go through some of those ideas to kind of dissect a game and figure out what is involved. So figure out how many levels there are, figure out if there's not specific levels, how many locations there are, how many characters are there in the story, how many sections or scenes might there be in a storyline. Figure out if they're going to do any pre-rendered or predetermined animations or cutscenes. consider the different thematic ideas, the different locations, the different character, just all sorts of any aspect that might need music, and that will at least give you a pretty solid list to start from, and then save room for changes and expansions to the overall game idea. All right, so for our last topic here, we're going to go through a bit of a history, trip down memory lane of all sorts of different game consoles and their capabilities for audio. Sorry. And we'll start out with the original Nintendo and move our way through Nintendo and Super Nintendo and GameCube, and go through Xbox and Xbox 360 and Xbox One. We'll go through PlayStation and PlayStation 2 and 3 and 4, and go through all the different generations and really get a sense of what was possible in each one of those game systems. So I also like to have you guys in the comments post up if you had these game systems, if you any favorite games that you played or remember from these, or different musical themes or ideas as we go through. And because I typically find that people played some of this stuff at some point in their lives. So we'll start out here with the Nintendo and the Super Nintendo. Hold on, let me take another quick pause here. All right, here in the chat we got Tecmo Bowl. Man, I played a whole bunch of Tecmo Bowl back in the day. It was a great football game. Absolutely amazing that all that stuff could be going on. So we'll start here at the original Nintendo. Think back to all of the your classic favorite themes from the original Nintendo. Of course, Super Mario Brothers, Legend of Zelda. We had Metroid and Mega Man and Mike Tyson's Punch Out, and I just had the other one. Oh, Tetris. Very, very classic themes overall, and all of those music themes were done with 5 basic waveforms. Actually, it was all of the music and sound effects were done with 5 simple waveform generators. You got 2 pulse waves, which are square waves, 1 triangle wave. So the 2 pulse waves were typically melody and harmony. Triangle wave was often bass. The noise channel was often percussion. And the one channel, PCM channel, you could draw your own waveforms. They were like a 6-bit waveform that you could draw and create your own sounds. So this was both music and sound effects. And so only a couple of channels were used for the music, and that left a couple others for sound effects. No RAM. Everything was no recorded audio. Everything was being generated in real time. I think later on they actually had cartridges that had RAM in them, but not in the actual game system itself. So came out in 1985, and then by 1989, 1990, we had the Super Nintendo, which could play back recorded audio, but the original Nintendo cartridges were very small, only a couple of kilobytes. I think the larger cartridges by the Super Nintendo could be like upwards of a megabyte. but still very, very small. And you really didn't have much room for recorded audio. But they did have a DSP chip for delay and filter, so you started getting some real-time effects in the game. How about Genesis fans? Anybody have or Sega fans? Anybody have a Genesis instead of a Nintendo, or both, or whatever? Sonic the Hedgehog fans? Here in the chat, here I am complaining about 8 gigs of RAM. Absolutely. Some of this we're looking at is just to show where we have come with all of the technology overall. I mean, all of the audio for one particular level, because as the games would load and you'd see a loading screen, it would unload all of the old stuff and then load all of the new stuff off of the cartridge into RAM. And so there was only 32 kilobytes worth of RAM for all of the audio sounds in one level of Sonic the Hedgehog. And that you'd be hard-pressed to make one sound for 32 kilobytes, which is not necessarily true, but it means that they did a lot of tricks to make all of this stuff work. It was one of the first game consoles with stereo output. It wasn't out of the back of the console. It was actually a headphone jack at the front. But 32 kilobytes worth of RAM for audio, but the rest of that does not include the music. The music was still being synthesized in real time. The original Sega, they partnered with Yamaha. This is the 80s, and so Yamaha was doing the DX7, which is like define the sound of the 80s synths. And so they had 6 FM voices. The DX7 was using FM synth technology. And so the music soundtracks from the Genesis were actually sounded better than the Nintendo at the time because they were using this Yamaha sound chip. Sega Saturn comes around a couple of years after that. It was one of the first game consoles with CD-based technology. So all of a sudden we went from a couple of megabytes on a cartridge to 650 megabytes on a game disc. So there was a whole bunch of room now for audio, and we got a lot of video, really bad video in games, and what else? Custom DSP chip for more effects processing, 16 channels of sound simultaneously, and we went up to 8 channels of FM synthesis. So we're still synthesizing the soundtracks in real time, and had the room on the game disc for other sounds. How about Nintendo 64? Players of that, I had my Nintendo 64, loved like Mario 64 and Mario Kart, and I think I played some NBA Jam on there, and all sorts of fun games. So the fun story here is that Sega had come out with the Sega Saturn. That was a CD-based technology. So Nintendo wanted to bring a CD-based game console to market. And so they hired Sony to make them a prototype of a game console. They were going to go and have a partnership between Nintendo and Sony to make the next gaming console. Sony had success with CD players in the consumer audio market with Sony Philips. They had done all of the early CD players in the 80s. And so Nintendo partnered with Sony to make a game console. And then they got pretty far. They had working versions of this console. And then somewhere in the contract, Nintendo realized that Sony was going to get all of the licensing fees for the CD-based games, and Nintendo was going to get all of the licensing for the cartridge-based games. This game console was going to do cartridges and CDs. And Nintendo knew that a lot of these games were headed towards the CD. They would be missing out on all of that revenue. So they broke off the contract with Sony. They went off and made their own Nintendo 64. And it was extremely popular. But Sony was left with a fully working game console. And so they said, okay, well, we'll just take this to market. And they created the Sony PlayStation. And, of course, massively changed the gaming market as a whole. They entered in with the Sony PlayStation. It was extremely popular. 650 megabytes on the disc. You get some of your first game soundtracks that were full music soundtracks. You get like Tony Hawk Pro Skater and Crazy Taxi, where the soundtrack was a full punk rock soundtrack. And so it greatly changed. You get orchestral recordings in your game. And it was massively successful and really changed what Sony is all about. At that time, Sony was consumer products. They were stereo receivers and televisions and phones and things like that. And that market has since gone away, and a lot of the market share is dominated by Sony. So it's pretty interesting in the changes overall in the market. So at this point, you are hitting the quality standard where things are CD-based technology. You had CD quality audio, 16-bit, 44.1. And so it's no longer synthesized music anymore. It was fully recorded soundtracks, and moved into the next generation here in the late 90s. We get Sega Dreamcast. Any Dreamcast players? Dreamcast had some great sports games on it. I think I played a whole bunch of Virtua Tennis and Virtua Football and all sorts of different things. Sega Dreamcast was, I guess, not as popular as it needed to be because it killed Sega as a console manufacturer. That was the last console. They just went straight to software. Maybe it had to do with the Dreamcast controller, this big clunky thing that had like a screen, like a memory chip in the middle of it. But pretty amazing technology overall. 64 channels of audio. We've gone from a couple of kilobytes to 2 megabytes worth of RAM for all of the audio. Real-time 3D DSP. This is where you start getting into 3D games, where it wasn't just a 2D screen, like a flat screen. You started going in, and there was dimension and distance in the games. And then along comes the PlayStation 2, which also dominated the market. It's kind of the grandfather of gaming consoles these days because PlayStation 2 was released in 1999, and they made the last game for it in 2014. So it had a huge, long shelf life, and is still kind of popular in other parts of the world where they don't necessarily have access to PlayStation 3 or PlayStation 4. So at this point, it's all about how much stuff. We get to DVD storage. We can have a whole lot of recorded audio and video. We have 48 channels of high-quality 48K audio. We could start getting into surround sound in movies, not directly in the games yet. And that leads us to, the Nintendo. Nintendo finally gets on to the CD-based game market with the GameCube, very popular for the Nintendo community. But at this point, Nintendo wasn't really pushing the technology envelope. Nintendo has always been very, very good at making Nintendo games. So you know you're going to get an awesome Mario game and an awesome Zelda game and Metroid and all of that. But they weren't about the technology. You remember how they had little small discs? Yep, the little games. We had Super Smash Brothers and some really popular games from it. But by this time you had Xbox and PlayStation, and they were really kind of very, very powerful machines. 64 channels of 16-bit 48K audio, so we hit the quality standard. We get a bit of surround sound, Dolby Pro Logic 2. This was before 5.1 surround sound off of DVDs. Disc storage from Nintendo. But then you get Microsoft jumps into the game with the Xbox. Microsoft had been involved with gaming with the PC for years, but they took over your office, and now they wanted to take over your living room also. And I would kind of consider the Xbox as one of the first kind of home entertainment systems, where not only did it play games, but it connected to the internet, and it played movies, and you could watch videos and download stuff and do all sorts of different things. So now you're really pushing the amount of audio that's going on. 256 stereo voices, 64 3D voices. This is the amount of sounds that could be played simultaneously. So you got really developed dense soundtracks. 3D panning and spatialization. We certainly had some strong 3D games by that point. 5.1 surround sound in games. 2 megabytes worth of RAM. That was 2 megabytes was a very common standard for quite a while in the industry. And then we get into the last generation, the generation before the current one, with Nintendo Wii. Again, Nintendo doesn't really push the graphics or audio envelope, but they bring about motion gaming. They got the Wii controllers. All of a sudden, it was a whole new way of playing video games. Now your kid was playing video games right along with your grandmother. Everybody was playing Wii Sports and bowling and all of these fun games. You had some cool things with audio. Now you had the controller. It made some noise. So you had a separate channel for audio there. 64 channels of 16-bit 48K. A total of 88 megabytes worth of memory. So you mentioned earlier having 8 gigabytes worth of RAM inside of your computer. And it was only the Nintendo Wii that only had 88 megabytes. So not heavily capable on the tech side, but really had interesting gameplay overall. Sony PlayStation 3 still probably dominates the industry. I don't think it's been taken over by the PlayStation 4 yet, but was really dominant in the industry for a very long time. 512 audio channels. You probably don't want to hear 512 sounds all playing at the same time. But if you go to surround sound and divide that by 6, then all of a sudden you get a much more realistic number of channels once you hit into 5.1 surround sound. PlayStation 3 only had a half a gigabyte worth of RAM. At that time, it was a whole bunch, but very quickly became not enough. Used 50 gigabyte Blu-ray discs, so we went from 4.9 gigabytes on a DVD to all of a sudden 50 gigabytes, a massive amount of room available for games. The Xbox 360, at this point, they're pretty comparable overall. 256 channels of 16-bit 48K audio. We certainly hit the full quality mark. We're doing 5.1 surround sound in games. 512 megabytes worth of memory. One of the main differences was still using DVD discs. So if you made a game that was going to be both on PlayStation and Xbox, you basically had to make sure that it fit on something that was like 1/10 the size of a Blu-ray disc for PlayStation. So there were a lot of differences, or they just made the games to fit on both systems. Now the current generation with the Wii U. Now we get this separate game controller with a touch screen. You get a separate audio output, so now your game is actually creating 2 completely different mixes. You have 6-channel output. This isn't 5.1 Dolby Digital or AC3 or DSD? No, DTS. It's none of those formats. It's just straight 6 individual channels coming out of the Wii. 2 gigabytes worth of RAM. One of it was for games. One of it was for the operating system. So still not a whole bunch of real high-powered engine inside of the Nintendo. But you get to PlayStation 4, the new one these days. Again, very, very powerful, but not a lot. Known about the inner workings. It's still very proprietary, and it is based off of. There is a separate audio chip in the PlayStation 4. You saw earlier on in like the Nintendo, Super Nintendo, and some of the earlier game systems, there was a separate dedicated card or chip to do audio. And then into the Xbox and PlayStation 2 and 3, they just went where everything was done on the processor. But now they've added a separate audio chip to do real-time effects processing, to do video recording, to do voice chat over the internet, from some very specific audio. And now we've reached 8 gigabytes worth of memory. So on the PlayStation 3, you had 512 megabytes, or a half a gigabyte. Now we have 8 gigabytes. They went from 16 times the amount of RAM from PlayStation 3 to PlayStation 4. So it's a huge amount of audio that's available. We're working with Madden, EA Sports, on the Madden game currently. And they said the amount of room that they have going from just doing PlayStation 3 games to PlayStation 4 games just means an explosion amount of audio that's possible in the games. So we get new ideas, but we'll fill it up eventually. We'll get higher quality audio. We'll get more audio. Microsoft, again, is pretty much comparable. They really battle back and forth in the industry. Xbox One has things like the Kinect and voice recognition, where some interesting audio can be done with that. 50 gigabyte Blu-ray disc, so they now have a large storage space. Dolby DTS audio, 8 gigabytes worth of shared memory. So both of these consoles are really quite powerful overall. So hopefully that gives you some insight into the history of audio for video games and what was possible over the years, and really how far we've come overall, because you don't really get a sense of it working with these. You got a pretty powerful laptop overall, and you've got lots of processing power and RAM and hard drive space, and of course we'll just keep filling it up and get bigger and better things over the time. But it's pretty interesting to see what they were capable of doing with such resources, small resources. All right, let's round it up there. If you have some questions, I'll stick around and we can answer those. We can address anything individually, but let's go ahead and wrap it up there.